Welcome back to another DNG focus video. We've now, by this point, if you've been watching the previous videos that I have done, we've been through the prerequisites where we've determined the features that we're going to use. So we covered an overview of the DNG and sort of things to consider when looking at deploying the dual network gateway. Then in our previous video we deployed our identity provider, so we tied in our on-premise Active Directory with Duo for single sign-on. So we configured all that, and now we are getting to the stages of deploying the actual server where the DNG will sit within the environment. So in terms of prerequisites, we're actually on this phase here. So deploy a DMZ server or DMZ server, and in the prerequisites and the documentation, there's a few considerations that one may want to take a look at before actually deploying the server, and this is really around resources that you're going to assign to that particular server for your DNG based on sort of the request that the DNG is going to be handling. So we can see here we've got a small table here which basically works on requests per second, or RPS, and you can see that the more requests coming into the DNG will determine the resources that are required for the server itself. So we can see if we're looking at anything up to 4500 RPS, then it's recommended that the server is running 16 cores with 64 gig memory and 20 gigs in disk space. So we can see that the disk space or storage stays consistent, and we can see that the memory and the cores, the CPU cores, are the ones that change mainly. So I've already installed a virtual CentOS 8 machine based on I think the 400 RPS as it's a lab environment. So we'll be kind of using that. There's a few more bits and pieces here. If you are looking at SSH, if you are going to be using SSH, we can see that it's going to also work on SSH connections in terms of the resource allocation. So you can see that we've got some parameters here in terms of the maximum sessions, the throughput, and the sort of cores that are required. So have a read through that. There's a few other bits and pieces that you need to take into consideration, but what we're interested in here is actually getting to installing the Duo network gateway which task we're focused on today. That's what we're going to do. So we'll essentially be running through the steps here, and there's two different deployment methods that are actually mentioned on this Duo documentation. So we've got one for web and SSH deployment. So if your deployment is only focused on web and SSH, then follow the steps to do that. However, as you may know, we now support remote desktop protocol. So if your deployment is focused on all three, so web, SSH, and RDP, or you are looking at potentially using RDP in the near future, then you really want to follow these steps here. So what we'll do is we'll run through all these steps here, which we're going to be focused on the web, SSH, and RDP deployment, covering these steps here today. And then in another video, once we've actually installed that, we will then take a look at actually configuring that Duo network gateway once we've actually done all the required steps to actually get the server configured on the back end. So if we just select Web, SSH and RDP, and then we can pretty much go from these steps here. And what I'll do, just to kind of demonstrate how easy the documentation is to follow, we will refer to this and use the commands that are on here so that we can verify and make sure that everything is done as recommended. So the very first thing that we want to do with our new server is, before we start the deployment process to configure Docker and everything else that's required on the server, we need to make sure that we first updated the server, so all the updates are in place, and then we can actually look at the installation of Docker and Docker Compose, and then we'll go back to complete the configuration for the DNG. So I'll just make sure my system is up to date. So if I just do okay, so you can see there I've got a few updates, so I'll quickly update this system and then we can return back to installing Docker and the remaining items that are required for the DNG. Alright, so the update is now completed, and that's my fault for not updating in a while, so do make sure that you do that before you install the rest of the components. It will save you a lot of time and possibly hassle. With that done, let's get back to the install now. So we're going to start by installing Docker. So first of all, we need to confirm that we have the correct 64-bit operating system installed. So to do that, we'll just do uname, and we can see there that we've got 64-bit installed, and we can confirm, as the document says, that the output there should be as we've just seen there. So now let's install the yum util. We can see that that's now completed successfully. Now what we'll do is we'll add the Docker repository to our yum repository. So we can do that now. Okay, so that's added that to the repository now successfully. We didn't get this output here. Maybe that's because we're running CentOS 8 as opposed to CentOS 7. But it has been added to the repository as well. And we can actually check that by going to the repository directory, which is yum.repo.d, and if we look for our repo, we can see there that we've got the Docker repo there as well, which is good. So yeah, docker-c.repo, that's in there, which is good. So we've confirmed that. Let's just change back to our directory. Let's just try and run that again without the fast. Okay, metadata cache created, that's fine. So some of the commands might vary. As I say, I'm using CentOS 8 the guide we're going through on the Duo documentation is referring to CentOS 7. So do make sure that you're using one of the versions that's listed on the Duo documentation, just so you make sure you don't run into any issues and make the install as easy as possible. But we got the we just removed the fast bit there in step 5, and we can see that the output we did get the output metadata cache created, and we can just verify that there, so you can see that there. So that's good. So now we're going to install curl if it's not already installed. I think it's already installed, but let's just run the command anyhow. Yeah, so nothing to do. So this is already installed, so we don't need to worry about that. So we won't get that output. And now we're going to move on to install in Docker itself. So yeah. So let's start by installing Docker. What's it giving us here? List of packages. Let's just run that again. Allow erasing. Okay, that looks like it's downloading now. So as you can see, running CentOS 8 and following the Duo documentation, slight variations in terms of the commands and the output that we get. So again, please do try and stick to the versions that are listed on the Duo documentation. Nevertheless, the process that we're running through here should be the output that we get from actually installing the DNG and Docker components, etc. Should provide us the same output you would expect with a using a different Linux flavor. Okay, so that's now complete, as we can see. So we can see that we get that output there at the bottom saying complete, and that's what we've just got there. So now we're going to enable the actual Docker service. So let's just paste this command in. Okay. And you can see again the output is similar to the one that we just got as well. So now we're going to check that Docker has been installed properly just by issuing the docker ps command. Really, I could have typed that out, but anyway. And we can see that we also get the same output here as well. So add your user to the Docker group so that Docker commands don't require sudo. So if you are using a particular user to install the Docker and DNG components, and you want that user to be permitted to run Docker commands without having to elevate privileges, then you can use this command here. So let's just copy this command in. And then log out of Docker, and then let's just run docker ps again. Okay, so that's good. Once you've done that, then we can move on to the last step in the prerequisites, which is to install the Docker Compose. So let's copy this command here, and then we can install Docker Compose now. Okay. And then you can see we also got a similar output to the one below there. And then we can also verify that it's installed by using the Docker Compose and checking the version. So let's just do that now. So it's still telling us permission denied. Docker Compose is installed. It's given us the permission denied. Whatever reason, we'll just continue with the installation. So what we'll do is we'll start to now look at installing the Duo Network Gateway for web, SSH and RDP deployments. So again, we'll just follow the documentation with the commands. So let's just run these. Alright, so we've saved the file now. So yeah, we can see that file there saved. Really, we need to move it to another directory. So let's just try and copy this. Okay, so we've moved it into there now, so that's fine. It's important, and it mentions it actually here, that it's important to save this YAML file to a persistent directory location for future use, so that it's easily accessible. So we've installed, or we've kind of downloaded the Duo Network Gateway now. We don't have to use wget because we use the curl command. So what we'll do now is we will move on to step 2, which is going to instruct Docker Compose to download the Duo Network Gateway image, including the additional DNS container for RDP. So if you are looking at setting the DNG up for RDP deployments, please make sure you are following these steps, because the DNS component or the DNS container is required for RDP. So let's copy this command here and paste that in. Just do a sudo. So that was denied. So let me, I tell you what, I'm going to change the permissions of the location. Let me just try to run a few commands here. Okay, that's expected. And not found. Okay, so that's fine. So let's change the permissions for the location, local bin, and then Docker Compose. Now let's try again. Okay, so now we can see permissions issue there. So I've fixed the above issue that we were seeing before, which is required. Now you can see the Docker Compose version here as well. So now let's just try to run this command. There we go. So now that's cool. That's working, which is good. So again, slight variations in what we're seeing when we're trying to do this on CentOS 8, as opposed to other versions I've installed this on before. But nevertheless, like I say, the end result should be the same. And if you are following the Duo documentation, then the steps in there should be more than enough if you are using one of the versions listed on there as well. So we'll just give this a few minutes to download, and then we can continue with the remaining steps. Okay, so that's the installation there for the DNG side. Pretty much done. You can see that we have all the elements downloaded. That can take anywhere up to 10 minutes depending on your resources assigned to the system, so just be patient with that as well. So we can see once we've done that, we can see that we also have those elements here displayed as output here. So the next step is to run the docker ps command, and this should verify that we've got all the elements or the 4 containers, the docker containers, configured correctly. So if we just run docker ps. Now I have noticed if you are using a Ubuntu flavor, sometimes you may get issues around the DNS container not successfully starting because the port 53 is binded to the local DNS. So if that is the case, then there is an article here I believe will help as well. I also have done a short write-up on my website around this and how to fix it. I believe there may be an easier way, and my way is slightly longer based on the kind of fix that I worked around the first time I did that. But yeah, just check out this article, see if it provides any useful information if you do run into that issue. But in terms of this deployment, you can see UDP 53 and TCP 53 for DNS assigned to the relevant Docker container here. So you can see there we've got that's for the DNS. We've got the 8443 for the admin, and then we've got the 18443 for the portal, and then we've got the Redis, which is for TCP 6379 as well. So that's everything that we need there, and we can confirm that in the documentation here as well. So in terms of actually configuring our container, our Docker containers, and getting the DNG installed, that should now be the DNG installed. Our next steps would be to actually access the DNG and configure the initial gateway configuration before we actually look at securing different applications, whether that's via RDP, web applications, or SSH. So we'll cover that in the upcoming video.